What if suddenly, everything you know ceased to exist in just a few hours? What if the streets that yesterday were teeming with tourists, the aromas of exotic food, and the vibrant chaos of Bangkok were transformed into a silent battlefield, dominated by lights in the sky and sounds no human can explain? This is the question that has haunted me ever since that night. I was just a backpacker, with my battered backpack, a cap to protect me from the sun, and a simple itinerary: visit temples, meet people, have adventures. But in a matter of minutes, the trip that was supposed to be the pinnacle of freedom became a desperate fight for survival amid an alien invasion. I remember the first sign clearly. The sky, usually stifling due to Thailand's humidity, began to light up strangely. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't floating Chinese lanterns. It was beams of light cutting across the horizon, accompanied by vibrations that shook the ground beneath my feet. People around me laughed, filmed with their phones, thinking it was some kind of spectacle. But something inside me told me it wasn't a party. It was the beginning of the end. Have you ever felt that sense that something terrible is about to happen, even when no one else notices? The city went into panic as the first explosions shook the buildings. The noise wasn't like ordinary bombs. It was something deeper, as if the air itself were being ripped apart. Sirens echoed, mingling with screams, and crowds rushed through the streets, trying to escape. I ran along, lost amidst the sea of tourists and locals, my backpack weighing heavier than ever. Every corner seemed more suffocating. Every shadow hid a fear, and in the back of my mind, a voice repeated, "They're here." Backpacking in that situation wasn't helping me. I had nowhere to go, no safe haven in Bangkok, just cheap hostels and makeshift maps. The subway stations were in chaos, the night markets transformed into mazes of smoke and debris. I needed to make quick decisions. Should I run where everyone else was going, or should I try to find an alternative route? It's in these moments that instinct takes over, and I followed my instinct. I moved away from the crowd, even though I wasn't sure it was the best choice. The ships were visible now, huge, hovering over the buildings like silent predators. From within them, a strange energy seemed to pulse, draining any remaining hope. People were dragged away by beams of light, screaming in different languages, but with the same universal terror etched on their faces. Thousands disappeared that first night, taken without explanation. What did they want? Why did they start in Bangkok? Too many questions, too few answers. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Surviving the first few hours isn't just about luck. It depends on seeing details others miss, on understanding that every sound, every shadow, and every decision can be the difference between staying alive or becoming just one of the thousands taken. I learned this the hard way, and as the dawn wore on, I realized the next few hours would be even more cruel. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that first night in Bangkok forever changed the way I see the world, and it may also change the way you see the idea of survival. And it was at that exact moment, when I thought nothing could get worse, that something happened before my eyes and made me understand that the invasion was just beginning. I knew every step I took could be my last. The streets of Bangkok, once full of life and noise, were now corridors of fear, lit by fires and lights streaming down from the sky. I didn't know where to run, didn't know if meeting someone would be good or bad. And in the midst of this chaos, one thing became clear to me. No one can survive an invasion like this alone. Fear, doubt, and even courage become more bearable when you share them with someone. And that's why I want to open this space here, between us. What would you do if you were trapped in a strange city during an alien invasion? Would you run with the crowd, or try to hide alone? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. I read every message, and believe me, your opinion can help create a true community of people who, like me, want to understand and imagine where fiction can take us. And if you feel that this kind of story captures your attention, that it makes you think and give you goosebumps, then please leave a like. It may seem like a small gesture, but it shows me that this content is truly reaching you. It's the fuel that gives me the strength to continue bringing you intense stories like this. And what's more, if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel now, because every time you do, you help this message reach more people, help this space grow, and ensure we continue together, exploring other stories of survival and invasions that I'll share in the future. Your participation here is what makes this channel exist, and without you, this journey wouldn't be possible. As I ran that night, my heart racing and my breath shallow, I realized the real battle wasn't just against the aliens. It was also against silence, against oblivion, against the idea that all of this could be ignored. And it was in that moment, amidst the fire and smoke, that something even more frightening revealed itself before me. I never imagined that trip would be marked by something so dark. Bangkok was supposed to be just another stop on my backpacking journey, a stopover full of color, flavor, and history, before moving on to another Southeast Asian country. My routine was simple. I'd wake up early, put my camera in my backpack, wear the same sun-worn cap, and get lost in the city streets. I didn't have much money, so I opted for cheap hostels, shared rooms with strangers, and ate at night markets, where the smell of spices mingled with the roar of motorbikes and the music blaring from bars. This was the life I chose, a life of discovery, improvisation, and freedom. I remember how the city seemed to never sleep. Tuk-tuks sped by, vendors shouted offers of clothes, food, and souvenirs, and the temples, with their golden statues, glowed even at night. It was impossible not to feel part of something larger, as if Bangkok were a living organism pulsing with energy. I wandered aimlessly, just going with the flow, letting the city guide me. There was a sense that nothing could go wrong, that this was just another step in my personal transformation, one of those experiences that changes the mindset of any traveler. But fate had other plans. No one wakes up expecting to see the world turn upside down. I was sitting in a square, eating chicken skewers I'd bought for a few coins, when the sky began to change color. First, it was a strange greenish hue, almost as if the atmosphere were transforming before our eyes. Then came the sounds, a constant that made my chest vibrate. People looked up, some laughing, others taking videos. I also thought at first that it might be some event, perhaps a party, a light show, but it wasn't long before the hidden truth began to reveal itself. The air felt heavy, as if an invisible pressure was pushing us down. The lanterns and neon signs that had enlivened the streets began to flicker, fading irregularly. It was at that moment that I realized something was very wrong. The crowd, once lively, now murmured. Confused glances met, and suddenly everyone seemed to understand at the same time that this was not normal. And then came the first explosion. The impact was deafening. One of the nearby buildings shook as if made of paper, and part of the structure collapsed amid dust and fire. People ran in all directions, desperate, unsure of where to escape. I stood paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. Then I saw it. Above us, hovering in the Bangkok night sky, were gigantic ships, with intense lights and inexplicable movements. There was no doubt. It wasn't human. The invasion had begun. The shock was immediate. Thousands of thoughts raced through my mind in seconds. Would I survive? Would I find shelter in a city that wasn't even my own? Every decision I made from then on would be crucial. There was no room for error. The backpacker life, made up of improvisation and quick choices, suddenly seemed like cruel training for this. Only now, it wasn't about missing a bus or choosing the wrong restaurant. It was about life or death. As I ran, I remembered conversations I'd had with other travelers days before, about how each experience shaped our journey. They spoke of courage, of freedom, of living in the moment. I never imagined those words would become the fuel to face something like this. In that moment, I realized that survival isn't just about physical strength. It's about mindset, about how you face the unknown, about how you react when the truth you've always believed in is shattered before you. I looked around and saw entire families being separated, children crying, people leaving behind suitcases, documents, everything they seemed to consider important just a few minutes ago. It's in these moments that masks fall, and we see who we truly are behind the scenes of fear. I was no longer just a backpacker seeking adventure. I was a human being trying not to get lost in the midst of a global collapse. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because around every corner in Bangkok, there was a new revelation, a new impact, and I needed to understand how every detail of that night could mean my salvation or my ruin. Comment below. This makes sense to me. If you also believe that, in extreme situations, it's the small decisions that define who survives and who doesn't come back. At first, no one could believe what they were seeing. The lights in the sky seemed like a planned spectacle, as if some tycoon had decided to surprise the city with futuristic fireworks. The Bangkok sky, already accustomed to floating lanterns and nighttime parties, seemed to have simply gained a new attraction. It took me a while to realize this wasn't a show. He was standing in front of a temple, the smell of incense mixed with street food still permeating the air, when the first columns of light descended like blades slicing through the atmosphere. There was no initial noise, just a deep, barely audible hum that vibrated the body inside, as if it were a frequency capable of reaching the soul. People laughed, pointed their phones, some even screamed with excitement. I remember a child jumping up and down excitedly, convinced he was witnessing an unseasonable New Year's Eve performance. But something inside me was already screaming differently. There was a strangeness there, a hidden truth that no one wanted to admit. That glow didn't dissipate like fireworks. It remained, motionless, too intense to be explained logically. The ground began to shake, not like an earthquake, but as if an invisible wave were spreading beneath our feet. It was a kind of impact that came not from below, but from above. I watched the faces around me and sensed the transition. Excitement began to turn into uncomfortable silence. The laughter subsided, eyes became more fixed, and everyone, deep down, understood that this was not normal. This transformation in the collective atmosphere was one of the most frightening moments, because I felt all at once how a crowd can change its mindset in a matter of seconds. From joyful spectators, everyone became potential survivors searching for answers. It was then that the sounds intensified. The hum grew louder, almost like hearing the engine of a colossal machine working simultaneously in all directions. There was no way to pinpoint its origin, as it seemed to be inside everyone's head. I held onto the railing of a staircase, trying to maintain my balance, and realized the air was also heavier. Breathing required more effort. I looked up and saw that they weren't just lights. They were beams connected to something larger, ships that had previously been invisible against the night sky. The reflection of their metallic structures began to reveal themselves, and in that instant, the truth could no longer be denied. They were here. The crowd reacted differently. Some screamed and ran, pushing whoever was in front of them. Others remained paralyzed, unable to move a muscle, and still others continued filming, as if the need to record was stronger than the need to survive. I watched everything and felt my heart race in a way I had never experienced before. It was as if each beat was a reminder that, from that moment on, every decision would carry unimaginable weight. The irony is that, minutes before, I had been concerned only with deciding whether to go to a night market or explore another temple. Small matters that seem big to a traveler. But there, in the eye of the chaos, I realized how our choices shift in scale. Life, which had seemed like a sequence of light experiences, had become a race against something unknown. It was like being backstage at a play that had never been rehearsed. There was no script, no instructions, just improvisation. And improvisation, in that moment, could mean survival. As the first structures in the sky revealed themselves, some tourists pointed and tried to guess what they were. Drones, some said. Technological show, others said. But reality was setting in all too quickly. The vibration in the air, the way the ground seemed to want to open up, the sound that penetrated the brain without asking permission. None of this was human. None of this was part of our logic. It was the beginning of a new order. It was then that I realized how the mindset of a survivor must be shaped in the heat of the moment. If you stood still, watching, you became a target. If you ran aimlessly, you could get lost in the chaos. Quick decisions were needed, and every second was precious. The transformation was happening not only in the sky, but within me. I was no longer the carefree backpacker. I was facing a revelation that forced me to see beyond appearances, to face the hidden truth that loomed over us all. And then, when one of the beams hit a nearby building, the entire structure collapsed in an explosion of concrete and fire. The impact sent shockwaves through the air, throwing people to the ground. The screams grew louder, and chaos ensued. In that instant, there was no doubt. These weren't pretty lights. These weren't drones. This was nothing humanity had ever seen before. The invasion had begun before my eyes, and Bangkok was becoming the first stage of a silent war no one was prepared for. The chaos didn't begin all at once. It settled like a wave that slowly grew until it became impossible to contain. First, there were nervous glances, hurried steps, trembling hands holding cell phones. But the first explosion was enough to change everything. A building in front of me collapsed in seconds, engulfed in a curtain of dust and fire. The sound was so loud it made my heart pound in time with the detonations. People fell to the ground, others screamed, unsure of where to run. It was as if the entire city had been ripped from its normal state of life and thrown into a collective nightmare. I found myself surrounded by a crowd moving aimlessly, running into each other, trying to find any way out. The tuk-tuks, which had once honked amid the city's chaotic traffic, were now abandoned in the streets, some still running. The subway closed within minutes, buses were unavailable, and even taxis had disappeared from the avenues. The roads were blocked in a matter of moments, either by massive traffic jams or by the destruction caused by the impacts coming from the sky. It was at that moment that I realized how the once vibrant city had become a trap for millions of people. There was a sound I'll never forget, the screams of thousands echoing at once. It was like being in a packed football stadium, but instead of celebration, there was fear. At every corner, different rumors spread. Some said they were military experiments. Others spoke of secret weapons from Asia, but the most repeated version, whispered as if it were a sin to utter, was that they were coming down. I myself didn't want to believe it, but each sign confirmed that there was no other explanation. The psychological impact was as strong as the physical. I remember looking at a man running beside me and seeing his expression crumble in seconds as a ship swooped down and fired a beam that exploded cars like toys. There was something cruel in their precision, as if it wasn't just destruction, but a clear message. We control every detail of this scene. The streets were littered with debris, and among them, people who, just minutes before, were simply going about their daily lives, buying food, laughing, strolling. This brutal transformation, from everyday life to tragedy, was what shook me most. I tried to reason, but my mind felt scrambled. It was as if every thought was cut off by the roar of explosions and the metallic clang coming from the sky. In situations like these, I realized that survival depends on more than physical strength. It depends on the mindset you adopt. Some chose to run without thinking, others froze, but I knew I needed to observe, understand patterns, find alternative routes. It was in that moment that I understood how our decisions, even under extreme pressure, can determine the end or the beginning of a new journey. I hid behind an overturned fruit stand, trying to catch my breath. The smell of smoke and gunpowder was suffocating, mixed with the sweet aroma of crushed mangoes on the ground. Small details like these are etched in memory, revealing the behind the scenes of a collapse. Everything that once seemed banal now became part of an unforgettable scene. And it was there, crouched among the rubble, that I clearly heard the sounds coming from the sky. They weren't just explosions or engines. They were like distant voices, metallic echoes that chilled me. It was confirmation that they weren't just destroying, they were getting closer. Bangkok, a city that never stopped, now lay silent between one explosion and the next. And in this silence, collective fear grew, multiplied. I could see in people's eyes that everyone already knew. There was no going back. This wasn't temporary. It was the beginning of a transformation that would forever change the way humanity sees its place in the universe. Because when the streets began to fill with smoke and the first figures began to reveal themselves among the shadows, I realized that the true terror was not only in the sky, but in what walked among us. I'll never forget the moment I first saw one of them. Until then, all I'd experienced was chaos, destruction, and the suffocating weight of uncertainty. But there was still the chance to convince myself they were just machines, remotely controlled weapons, unknown technology being used against us. The human mind clings to any explanation that might lessen the impact of the impossible. But that night in Bangkok, there was no escaping the revelation. When the first of them appeared before my eyes, every illusion crumbled. I was running down a narrow street, dodging debris and screaming people, when a beam of light swept across the ground just a few feet away. That flash wasn't just brightness. It was heat. It was pressure. It was as if the air itself had been compressed in a second. I threw myself behind an overturned car, breathing quickly, trying to convince myself I'd narrowly escaped. But then I noticed the shadow, a silhouette that shouldn't have been there, silhouetted against the fire-consuming part of a building. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was a kind of metallic vibration, as if the creature's every movement created an echo that penetrated its body, felt more than heard. The skin, or what seemed like skin, reflected the light of the flames with an irregular texture, as if made of overlapping plates, moist and pulsating, like something alive and mechanical at the same time. It was impossible to tell if it was flesh, metal, or a mixture of both. The eyes, Two deep, incandescent circles rotated in different directions, as if observing everything around them simultaneously. It didn't blink, it simply registered. The smell was also unmistakable. It wasn't the same as smoke and gunpowder, but something different, more acidic, more organic, like burnt iron mixed with the odor of exposed flesh. With each step I took, a feeling of nausea coursed through me. It was as if the creature's very presence were poisoning the air around it. I remember holding my breath as if that would hide me, but his eyes fixed on me. There was, no doubt, he knew I was there. The helplessness was immediate. All the stories I'd read about alien invasions, all the movies that showed heroes fighting otherworldly creatures, it all seemed ridiculous in that moment. No weapon, no courage could balance that scale. I was just a human being, fragile, trapped in the corner of a street that now seemed narrower than ever. He moved with a kind of calculated slowness, as if already certain of the outcome. Each step made the ground vibrate, but not heavily, but almost electrically. Details became clear. There were marks on its surface, symbols or scars that pulsed bluish tones. And when his mouth, or something resembling an opening in his face, opened, a sound came from within, like a low, drawn-out whisper in a language not meant for humans to understand. At that moment, a craft descended above us. It was colossal, far larger than anything I could have imagined. Its light cut through the sky and illuminated the creature completely. For the first time, I could see its full body. Its legs were long and curved, as if made for walking on terrain unheard of on Earth. Its multiple arms moved with frightening coordination, each one seemingly equipped with something between claws and tools. The sensation that I was not facing a mindless animal, but a sentient and far superior being, paralyzed me. I could hear people running in the background, some shouting prayers, others calling for family. But for me, in that moment, everything disappeared. It was just me, him, and the certainty that the hidden truth of the universe was there, before me, brutally revealed. I understood, with painful clarity, that we were not the masters of this world. We had always deluded ourselves into believing that humanity had control, that our cities, our technologies, and our weapons put us on top. But faced with that creature, I realized we were merely temporary visitors to a planet that could be taken in a matter of hours. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to rip through my chest. My mind begged for a way out, any route, but my eyes couldn't look away. It was as if, in that encounter, there was a silent message. You were never the strong ones. The transformation I experienced in that moment wasn't just one of fear, but of awareness. The journey that began as a backpacking trip became a race for answers, a fight against insignificance. As he took a step forward, a car exploded behind me, creating a wave of heat that made me jump and run instinctively. I didn't look back. I just knew I needed to move, that I needed to stay alive. But the feeling of those eyes still fixed on me lingered. It was as if I'd been marked, chosen. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because that first vision wasn't just a shock, it was a revelation. From that moment on, I understood that we weren't just facing an invasion, but something much bigger, something that held secrets about who we are and how far our limits as a species truly extend. Write down, I'm on this journey too. If you also believe that certain encounters have the power to forever transform the way we see life, instinct took over. After that first contact, the only thing on my mind was survival. I ran without looking back, stumbling over debris and dodging people in utter desperation. The streets of Bangkok, always filled with smiling tourists and lit-up stalls, now seemed a maze of smoke, fire, and screams. The scene had transformed into a nightmare, and every corner seemed to hide a new threat. My first attempt was to seek shelter in the narrow alleys that crisscrossed the city. I'd passed through them on normal days, observing how bustling they were with life, with small makeshift restaurants and hidden shops. But that night, those same alleys were traps. Smoke accumulated, the smell of burning rubber permeated the air, and the shadows cast by the flames created the illusion of movement on every wall. Even so, entering them gave me a few seconds to breathe and think. I wasn't alone. I soon met other backpackers, people like me, carrying only a backpack and fear written all over their faces. There was a couple from Germany, a young man from Argentina, and a Japanese girl who was shaking uncontrollably, clutching her cell phone with a cracked screen. We didn't speak the same language fluently, but desperation creates a universal connection. One look was enough to understand that everyone was searching for the same thing, a safe place, a chance to hide from whatever was coming from the sky. It was at that moment that I realized that group survival can be both a support and a risk. Support because you're not alone, risk because any mistake by one could cost everyone their lives. We decided to try the subway. It seemed logical. Being underground would protect us. But when we reached the entrance, the scene was desperate. Hundreds of people had already had the same idea. The gates were closed, locked with bars that no one could open. The commotion was so great that I saw people hurting each other, trying to force their way through. The sound of explosions outside mingled with the cries of children and the screams of those begging for help. With every minute, more people were pulled into the air by the lights descending from the ships, disappearing before our eyes. Panic spread like wildfire, and staying there was as dangerous as being exposed on the streets. We hurried back, looking for another alternative. That's when we passed a temple. The doors were open, and several people had already entered, believing this sacred place could offer protection. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe that being in a space charged with spirituality could indeed ward off the threat, but another part knew that for beings capable of destroying entire buildings in seconds, temples were nothing more than fragile structures. Still, we entered, and for a few minutes, the silence inside brought relief. The lit candles still burned, the bells still swayed in the warm wind blowing through the windows, and the golden eyes of the Buddha statues reflected the flickering light. People prayed in different languages, some on their knees, others embracing in despair. It was as if, in the face of death, everyone was searching for some kind of hope. But the peace was short-lived. A loud crash shook the walls, sending chunks of the ceiling crashing to the floor. Panic returned. Those who had been praying began to run again, and once again, chaos overcame faith. It was at that moment that I understood. There was no truly safe place. Every shelter was only temporary. Every decision had to be reconsidered every second. Survival wasn't about finding a permanent refuge, but about keeping moving, adapting to whatever was unfolding before our eyes. As we ran back to the streets, the scene was even more cruel. I saw tourists being swept away by the lights, their screams lost in the air. Some were pulled away in groups, others isolated, as if some kind of selection were taking place. I didn't know if it was random or if there were hidden criteria, but the feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. Everything seemed beyond any human logic, and at the same time, I realized how every step I took, every decision to turn right or left, was putting me on a journey that went far beyond physical survival. It was a test of mentality, of emotional endurance. It was as if the hidden truth about who we are is only revealed when we are pushed to the limit. It was at that moment that I remembered something one of the backpackers had said as we ran. We are living a story that will never be told. Those words kept hammering at me. There was a weight to them, an awareness that perhaps there was no future, that perhaps no one would survive to report what was happening. And yet, part of me clung to the idea of resisting, of pushing forward, because deep down, there was the hope that someone would need to remember all of this. Someone would need to bear the brunt of the revelations before us. Because when I realized that survival didn't just depend on running, but on understanding the behind the scenes of what was really happening in that invasion, my perspective completely changed. I knew that every detail could be a clue, every ruin could hide an answer, and that perhaps the difference between living and dying lay in seeing what most people ignored. With every corner I turned, it seemed the city presented me with a new nightmare. It wasn't just aliens threatening our lives, but also the human collapse born amidst the chaos. People showed their best and worst in a matter of seconds, and I had never felt so intensely the impact of collective decisions on individual fate. I can still clearly remember the look of hopelessness in the eyes of a friend I'd met days earlier in a cheap hostel near Khao San Road. He was Chilean, a backpacker like me, with whom I'd shared travel stories, laughs, and even a few beers. We were together when the first explosions began, running side by side as if our newly formed friendship had been a long time coming. But the instant the lights descended toward the crowd, his path ended. A beam sliced through the air, and in less than a second, he was ripped away from me, sucked into the sky without me even reaching out. The image of his face, frozen between panic and disbelief, became one of the most painful memories of that night. I screamed, but there was nothing I could do. This loss affected me profoundly. Until that moment, I believed it was enough to run, enough to find routes, enough to be fast. But when I saw someone running at the same pace being taken, I realized there were no guarantees. Survival wasn't just about movement. There was something beyond, something that eluded us. A silent selection seemed to be taking place, and the mere fact that I was still on the ground was a disturbing revelation. It made me question everything. Why were some taken and others not? Was it luck? Was it chance? Or were there criteria we couldn't understand? This hidden truth haunted me at every step, and there was no way to ignore it. And it wasn't just aliens who took lives that night. Desperation turned ordinary people into predators. I saw residents locking doors and windows, expelling those seeking shelter, afraid to share resources or simply be discovered. I also saw small gestures of humanity, like a woman who opened her own home to shelter strangers, offering water and food as sirens echoed outside. This duality resonated deeply with me, because it showed that the true battlefield was not just in the sky, but within ourselves. It was the struggle between compassion and selfishness, between solidarity and betrayal. One of the most difficult moments occurred on a bridge, when a group of people tried to cross it at once. The weight of the crowd shook the structure, and soon, the shoving began. I was in the middle of the melee, trying not to fall into the dark river that flowed below. A man grabbed my arm tightly, almost dragging me with him. For a second, I considered letting go, letting him fall to save myself, but something inside me wouldn't let me. I pulled with all my strength, and he managed to get up. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and I realized that that simple act had changed something in both of us. But then he ran, disappearing into the crowd. It was like a reminder that human connections were too fragile in that reality. The contrast in attitudes I witnessed shaped my mindset in a way I'll never forget. When someone offered me help, it rekindled a spark of hope. But when I saw people being left behind, pushed, or even assaulted, I understood how the invasion wasn't just destroying cities, but also testing the very fabric of our being. It was as if the aliens had pressed an invisible button and revealed what we truly are when everything we know crumbles. The loss of my friend, combined with the scenes of solidarity and selfishness around me, made me realize that survival wasn't just physical, it was also emotional. Every life taken, every act of kindness or cruelty, weighed like a new layer on my mind, as if I were carrying not only my journey, but that of everyone who crossed my path that night. I was no longer just a backpacker trying to have adventures. I was someone marked by stories intertwined with pain. As I advanced through the devastated city, I realized that perhaps our greatest enemies were not only those that came from the sky, but also the fears, choices, and revelations that arose within us, revealing who we truly are when there is nothing left but survival. The last hours of the night were the longest of my life. Almost 20 hours had passed since the invasion began, and my body felt like it couldn't take any more. I was hiding inside an abandoned warehouse, its doors half destroyed and the ceiling about to collapse. The silence inside was only apparent because with every creak of the wood, every gust of wind that filtered through the cracks, my mind imagined something was about to find me. My hunger was becoming unbearable. I'd lost track of how many hours it had been since I'd put anything in my mouth. The water remaining in my bottle was only a few drops, which I hoarded like gold. My dry mouth burned, and every time I swallowed, my throat felt scratchy. The worst part, however, wasn't the lack of food or water. It was the exhaustion. The exhaustion was so great that my body shook on its own, without the strength to control it. I wanted to sleep, to close my eyes for a few minutes, but I couldn't. Sleep meant surrendering, and part of me was already questioning whether survival still made sense. What would be the ultimate fate for someone like me? To run, to hide, to watch people being taken, to lose friends, to witness destruction, and to have nowhere to go. What was the reward for resisting? This was the question that echoed like a sentence in my mind. With each passing moment, the feeling of helplessness grew. I heard distant screams, explosions, the metallic rumble of ships, and it all seemed endless. It was as if time had stopped, trapped in a night without dawn. The hope that the sun would rise, and with it some kind of respite, seemed to fade. I peered through the cracks in the warehouse and saw only smoke, flashes of destruction, and strange shadows moving through the city. It was impossible to tell if they were people or creatures, but either way, I didn't have the courage to go out and find out. It was at that moment that I realized how survival isn't just physical, but also mental. The body can endure more than we imagine, but the mind, The mind is treacherous. It creates scenarios, heightens fear, repeats dark thoughts as if it were silent torture. I thought about the previous days, how light my journey had been, full of small pleasures, and now I found myself surrounded by darkness. The transformation had been so brutal that it felt like I was a different person, not the curious and adventurous backpacker, but a directionless fugitive, a ghost wandering in a city that no longer existed. The night was dense and time passed in drops, slow and cruel. I felt my body begging for rest, but fear kept me awake. Fear is a strange fuel. It paralyzes you, but at the same time, it keeps you from falling. It was what kept me alive, even when everything told me to give up. I remember thinking that maybe it would be easier to give in, to let them find me, and just be done with that anguish. But an inner voice, almost imperceptible, insisted that I needed to keep going, that there was something beyond that night. And it was in this state of extreme exhaustion that I began to hear different sounds. They weren't explosions nor screams. They were footsteps, slow, heavy, almost rhythmic. My heart raced. The sound echoed inside the warehouse, and I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside or if they were already inside. I held my breath, leaning against a stack of boxes, trying to blend into the darkness. Sweat dripped down my face, not just from the stifling heat, but from terror. And then, a shadow crossed the crack of light that filtered through the crack in the door. The silhouette wasn't human. I felt my body freeze completely. At that moment, all sense of time vanished. I don't know if I remained in that position for a few seconds or several minutes, just listening to the creature's heavy breathing. I didn't dare move. The sound of my heartbeat was so loud it seemed he could hear it from where he was. I felt like I had reached my limit, that there was no way out. But suddenly, the footsteps began to recede. I remained still, waiting a few more moments, until silence once again dominated the room. My body collapsed, but I couldn't cry. I felt empty inside, as if my emotions had been sucked out along with the city's energy. And yet something told me I had to get up. I had to keep going. I let the last drop of water run down my throat, a reminder that I was still breathing. I was alive, and maybe, just maybe, this had some purpose. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because in that darkness, when the city seemed lost and my mind told me to give up, I realized that survival is also about finding meaning in the midst of chaos, even when everything seems inexplicable. It's at this point that we begin to discover who we truly are and how far we can go when nothing remains but the will to resist. Comment below. I'm on this journey too, if you understand how the weight of exhaustion can reveal as much as fear itself. The sky began to lighten slowly, as if dawn were afraid to appear. The first colors of the day mingled with the smoke that still shrouded Bangkok, creating a scene where the sun seemed too weak to face the darkness of the previous night. I was exhausted, but at the same time I couldn't help but notice how the city had transformed in just a few hours. The streets that once throbbed with life were now covered in debris, overturned vehicles, ruined buildings, and amidst it all, silence, a heavy silence, broken only by the distant sounds of ships that still hovered overhead, like predators unhurried because they know they've already won the hunt. The sunrise brought no relief. It brought an even greater weight. It was as if the light had revealed more clearly the tragedy that the night had hidden in the shadows. I wondered what had happened to the thousands of people who disappeared, sucked into the lights. Were they dead? Were they somewhere beyond our comprehension? This was the question that gnawed at me. Was there a hidden truth behind that invasion? Something greater, beyond mere destruction? Perhaps they didn't want to simply eliminate us, but to transform us into something different, to shape humanity for a purpose we can't yet grasp. It was impossible not to reflect on the fragility of our species. We've always seen ourselves as masters of the earth, as conquerors of every piece of nature, as those who dominate time, space, and technology. But in less than 24 hours, I realized that all this power was an illusion. It took just one night for everything to crumble, for what we call civilization to prove to be nothing more than a sandcastle before a giant wave. This revelation hit me hard, and I realized that the true transformation taking place was not just physical, but mental. I was no longer the same backpacker who arrived in Thailand in search of adventure. I had become a survivor, someone marked by the impact of decisions and experiences that would forever change the way I see the world. As I walked down a partially destroyed street, I saw people gathering in small groups. Some wept, others prayed, and some simply stared into space, as if trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. I realized we were all united by the same feeling, that we were not ready. No government, no army, no human being had truly prepared for this. The behind-the-scenes nature of our daily lives was nothing more than a fragile preparation for something we could never control. And this made me think about how we often live distracted, believing we will always have tomorrow to make important decisions. But when tomorrow is ripped away from you, what is left? Every step I took was accompanied by doubt. Would I see another day? Would there even be a tomorrow for me? This uncertainty weighed most heavily, even more than hunger, thirst, or fear. Because survival isn't just about being alive, it's about believing there's meaning in continuing. And there, with the sun rising over a burning Bangkok, I didn't know if that meaning still existed, because that morning wasn't just the end of a night. It was the beginning of a new reality, a reality in which every choice, every thought, and every act revealed who we truly were when hope seemed to slip through our fingers. If you were in my shoes, under that sky filled with ships and destruction, what would you do in the first 24 hours of an alien invasion? Comment below. I know what I would do, and share your perspective, because sometimes it's in the sum of our perspectives that we find the most unexpected revelations. After reliving all of this with you, I feel like this journey doesn't end here. With every detail recalled, it feels like there's still something to be discovered, something that continues to echo in my memory, as if that night had never ended. And that's why I want us to continue this experience together. If this content